In life, you can't be afraid to ask the tough questions like, why are we here? What's the meaning of life? And is Final Fantasy X-2 really as bad as everybody says it is? Yes, it's different. Yes, it's girly. And yes, Riku forgot what a shirt is. But are those things enough to constitute a bad game? Today we find out as we dive right into Final Fantasy X-2. But first, some backstory on Final Fantasy. The original Final Fantasy was made for the Nintendo Entertainment System back in 1987, but North America wouldn't get their hands on the title until a couple of years later. Back then, the company was simply known as Square and on the verge of bankruptcy. Final Fantasy was intended to be the last title Square was going to put out, hence the name Final Fantasy. But the game performed so well that the company managed to stay afloat, and thus Final Fantasy became the staple of the company. It should be noted that Final Fantasy is a brand name as each individual. Final Fantasy takes place in a different setting with a new cast of characters having nothing to do with the previous game, with, of course, the exception of direct sequels like the one we're looking at today. However, the game does have plenty of trademarks that find themselves in each installment. Final Fantasy X-2 takes place 2 years after the events of Final Fantasy X, and this time stars Yuna, the summoner from the first game who is now the member of a sphere hunting group called the Gullwings, traveling the world with fellow Gullwings members, Riku and Pain. After finding a sphere that showed what is presumed to be Titus, Yuna joins the Gullwings in an effort to find him. We start things off with a concert that showcases Yuna singing and dancing and being the next Britney Spears, only to find out that by the end of it, it's not even really Yuna, but someone who stole her dress sphere and pretended to be her. That's all well and good, except when Riku and Pain uses the dress sphere, they don't literally turn into Yuna, so what the hell? Let's talk about the dress spheres. At any time during the fight, you can change your character's attire and attributes through the sphere grid, or set them each individually beforehand in the display window. This was one of the main changes going into Final Fantasy X-2, and there's 6 main dress spheres altogether. It provides a new level of strategy as you're able to change your character's attributes at will, and it's also a good way to pay tribute to the games that came before, the biggest example being the black and white mages. The battle system itself is more fast-paced than previous games. You need to be able to think quick on your feet, and it can be exciting seeing all the characters running from their original spot and staying in position from the last place they attacked, depending on whether they're fighting at close range or not. While the last title was a tad more linear than some would have liked, X-2 provides a more open world and even gives you some matter of choice where the story will go. Every city that was revealed in the last Final Fantasy game is available to travel to at the very beginning, and when the story advances, you can choose which place to go to first among other choices that present itself in the game. The more you play, the higher your completeness level will become, which will ultimately decide which ending you will get. Yes, there are alternate endings. I'm also glad to be able to say that Yuna English VA in this game does a much better job than in the first one. You know how she was always trailing off at the most awkward of places? Yeah, there's none of that in this game. She speaks at a much more regular pace this time around. So all in all, is Final Fantasy X-2 really as bad as people say it is? I'm gonna have to say, no. No, it's really not. It's different. The shift is going to a more female audience, at least I'm assuming, because from what little I know of Japan, this is nothing new. Does it sometimes shift into realm of being stereotypical of what girls like? Yes. Are there parts which are just blatant fan service? Definitely. Does it work as a sequel? You could argue that Final Fantasy X didn't really need a sequel, but here's the thing. Final Fantasy X-2 is only trying to be a fun and enjoyable game with a more uplifting atmosphere than the previous title. It's Yuna all grown up, and when you look at it that way, the game is just fine. So, if you're into games where you play as a female who can transform and use different powers, which is at the same time cheesy, then you are going to love this. If you can't stand any of that, then I recommend giving this game a pass. Get it.